Hello, welcome to Shmirchik Corner, where you'll experience all the unpleasantness that comes with me, including farting, sneezing, wheezing, oozing, sneezing, twitching, itching, and everything else. If you can handle that, then welcome. Right? Yes. I don't know why. I'm supposed to be live already. Seriously. Strange. Is it live? Upcoming live.
Live.
Okay, now.
Live. Okay, now. Live.
Welcome to Shmirchik Corner. You experience all the unpleasantness that comes with me, including farting, sneezing. Okay, so yeah. So today is Friday, and what is it, March 8th? And I wanted to talk about Diogenes, because basically he was a philosopher who did stunts, apparently. Because my friend, she thought that basically there was a philosopher that figured out that when you throw something up, it comes down. So then I typed that in, and this guy's name came up, Diogenes, the philosopher, and apparently he didn't throw anything up that came down. He was just a madman, and then it reminded me of my youth, when I was a kid. Me and my sister, we would go in the bathroom, and we would take a shower, and then we would take wet tissues that we found on the floor. Hi, Redbeard. Yeah, Madman Diogenes. Yeah, and we take either wet the tissues or find wet tissues that we made a mess with, and we would squeeze it and throw it on the ceiling, and the whole ceiling was filled with wet tissues, and it would stick. Yeah, so that was my childhood. I don't know how my parents tolerated us. We were so wild. Right, it was a part of our hobby. Our hobby was to take wet tissues and throw it in the ceiling. Anyway, so we have to. How are you doing, Redbeard? L'chaim. So, yeah, I've been pretty miserable today. I think it's because I'm expecting a monthly visitor, and every single time a week before, it's like I get so, it's an emotional roller coaster. If you're female, right? That's something that men don't get, especially when you're trying to have a relationship with somebody and they will call you crazy for being emotional. You know what I mean? Then you understand why their wives cheated on them and why their wives cheated on them with their best friend, It's an interesting thing, right? A lot of men, they're like real assholes. There's like a real deficit in the male gender. There's something very wrong there, you know? Thank you, Redbeard. Next. Yeah. So, Diogenes, right? Let's see who he was, right? Diogenes. He was Diogenes, also known as Diogenes the Cynic. Okay, or Diogenes of Sinope. He was a Greek philosopher and one of the founders of Cynicism. He was born in Sinope, an Aeolian colony on the Black Sea coast of Anatolia, in 412 or 404 BC, and died at Corinth in 323 BC. So I think he lived in the same time as Alexander the Great, right? He was a controversial figure. He was banished or fled from Sinope over debasement of currency. What does that mean? The debasement of coinage is the practice of lowering the intrinsic value of coins, especially when used in connection with commodity money, such as gold or silver coins, while continuing to circulate it at face value. So he was basically a little thief. A coin is said to be debased if the quantity of gold, silver, copper, or nickel in the coin is let's see, if the coin, copper, nickel, or gold is reduced, so there's not enough gold in there. Debasement is a practice of governments, and in government debasements, governments make their debased coins legal tender, which is not something private minters can do, given that the practice cannot be easily engaged in without a government requiring that people accept debased coins. So governments can do it, but people cannot. So government can also be thieves, right? Yeah. So, Diogenes was a controversial. He was the son of the mint master of Sinope, and there is some debate as to whether or not he alone had debased the Sinopean currency, whether his father had done this, or whether they had both done it. After his hasty departure from Sinope, he moved to Athens, where he proceeded to criticize many conventions of Athens of that day. There are many tales about him following Antisthenes, and becoming his faithful hound, his faithful dog. Antisthenes was a Greek philosopher and a pupil of Socrates. We spoke about Socrates, right? Antisthenes first learned rhetoric under Diogenes before becoming an ardent disciple of Socrates. He adopted and developed the ethical side of Socrates' teachings. Okay. Diogenes was captured by pirates and sold into slavery. Slavery in ancient Greece was accepted, as it was in contemporaneous societies. The principal use of slave was in agriculture, but they were also used in stone quarries or mines and as domestic servants. Yeah, so in Athens, Greece, it was normal to have slaves, which is disgusting, right? So okay, so back there, right? Eventually settling in Corinth. Where's Corinth? Corinth is, okay, it's not showing me because the internet is not working so well, right? Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, money lending, you say, was outlawed in Athens. But he was not. It was not because of that. He had to leave his country because of, like, basically cheating people with the coins, right? It was a city or state, right? So my internet sucks. I can't find it. There he passed his philosophy of cynicism to Crates, who taught it to Zeno of Citium. Okay, so Zeno of Citium was a Hellenistic philosopher from Citium, Cyprus. He was the founder of the Stoic school of philosophy, which he taught in Athens from about 300 BC, based on the moral ideas of the Cynics. Stoicism laid great emphasis on goodness and peace of mind gained. Very nice. Okay, so so then who fashioned it? So Zeno of Citium, who fashioned it into the school of Stoicism. So I know a lot of people that are. I know it's a city or state, right? So I know a lot of people that are into like Stoicism, like the whole philosophy of Stoicism, right? So it's a thing, it's a real thing. Stoicism is a school of Hellenistic philosophy that flourished in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. The Stoics believed that the practice of virtue is enough to achieve an eudaimonia, a well-lived life. The Stoics identified the path to achieving it with a life spent practicing the four virtues. One of the most enduring schools of Greek philosophy. No authenticated writings of Diogenes survive, but there are some details of his life from anecdotes, especially from Diogenes Laertius. Who's that? He was a biographer of the Greek philosophers. Little is definitively known about his life, but his surviving lives and opinions of eminent philosophers is the principal source for the history of ancient Greek philosophy. His reputation is controversial. Okay, so especially from Diogenes Laertius' book Lives and Opinions of Eminent Philosophers and some other sources. So that's how we know about his behaviors from this guy, right? Okay, so moving on, right? Diogenes made a virtue of poverty. He begged for a living and often slept in a large ceramic jar. Seriously? Or pithos. What's a pithos? Pithos is a Greek name of large storage container. What a weirdo. He's a weirdo. The term in English is applied to such containers used among the civilization that borders the Mediterranean Sea. Neolithic, the Bronze Age, and the succeeding Iron Age. Pitho. So he was basically mentally ill because only mentally ill people, not only, but most mentally ill people are homeless, right? Take it with a pinch of salt. These are legends from legends. Okay, I will, right? He used his simple lifestyle and behavior to criticize the social values and institutions of what he saw as corrupt, confused society. He had a reputation of sleeping and eating wherever he chose in highly non-traditional fashion, and took to toughening himself against nature. He declared himself a cosmopolitan and a citizen of the world, rather than claiming allegiance to just one place. So he was a rebel. Very nice, good for him. He modeled himself on the examples of Heracles, born Alcaeus or Alcides, was a divine hero in Greek mythology, the son of Zeus and Alcmene, and the foster son of Amphitryon. He was descendant and half-brother of Perseus. He was the greatest of the Greek heroes. Okay, very nice. Okay, where are we? He believed that virtue was better revealed in action than in theory. I agree with that, actually. I actually agree with that, Actions speak louder than words. He became notorious for his philosophical stunts, such as carrying a lamp during the day, claiming to be looking for a man, often rendered in English as looking for an honest man. As Diogenes viewed the people around him as dishonest and irrational, he criticized Plato, disputed his interpretations of Socrates, and sabotaged his lectures. Why did he criticize Plato? Okay, so let's see. Diogenes, let's look it up. Why Diogenes criticized Plato? Okay, my internet doesn't let me look into it. It's really annoying, No internet. Okay, fine. So, he criticized Plato, disputed his interpretation of Socrates, and sabotaged his lectures, sometimes distracting listeners by bringing food and eating during the discussions. He was like, in some ways, I really like his personality because he just didn't care about anybody or anything. He just did what he thought was right? So he was his own character, and he had a rebellious personality, it seems, right? But at the same time, he does sound like a nut. You know what I mean? So, he became notorious for his philosophical stunts, such as carrying a lamp during the day, claiming to looking for a man, often rendering in English as looking for an honest man. As Diogenes viewed the people around him as dishonest and irrational, he criticized Plato, disputed his interpretation of Socrates, and sabotaged his lectures, sometimes distracting listeners by bringing food and eating. Diogenes was also noted for having mocked Alexander the Great, both in public and to his face. It sounds like my uncle. Like, my uncle was also very... He would go and antagonize everybody just to get a kick out of it, Just to play devil's advocate, just to, for argument's sake, and to get people worked up, The meaning of Diogenes of Sinope and Alexander the Great is one of the most discussed anecdotes from philosophical history. Many versions of it exist. The most popular relate it as evidence of Diogenes' disregard for authority, wealth, and decorum. And he lived in a barrel. His house was on the street in a barrel. How funny is that, right? Mm. Nothing is known about Diogenes' early life, except that about his father. That his father, Hicesius, was a banker. It seems likely that Diogenes was also enrolled into the banking business, aiding his father. At some point, the exact date is unknown. Hicesius and Diogenes became involved in a scandal involving the adulterations of debasement of the currency, and Diogenes was exiled from the city and lost his citizenship and all his material possessions. This aspect of the story seems to be corroborated by archaeology. Large numbers of defaced coins, smashed with a large chisel stamp, have been discovered at Sinope, dating from the middle of the 4th century BC, and other coins of the time bear the name of Hicesius as the official who minted them. During this time, there was much counterfeit money circulating in Sinope. The coins were deliberately defaced in order to render them worthless as a legal tender. Sinope was being disputed between pro-Persian and pro-Greek factions in the 4th century, and there may have been political rather than financial motives behind the act. So he wasn't so innocent himself. He did some illegal stuff, right? Okay, so let's go look at let's go see some of his crazy behaviors, right? Okay, no internet, right? No internet. Who is this? Let's see. Confucius? No. Let's go see this one. Okay. Mad Dog Diogenes. Right? Okay, let's go see what that says. Mad Dog Diogenes. Truth and fiction allied in the life of the colorful figurehead of cynicism, which presents a considerable challenge to the biographer. The dangerous life and ideas of Diogenes the Cynic. Jean Manuel Robineau, translated by Malcolm de Beauvois, Oxford University. Given that the philosopher Socrates was widely considered eccentric for leading a life of single-minded devotion to seeking the truth, it would not be surprising if his younger contemporary Diogenes had been thought, to use a colloquial term advisedly, barking mad just like a dog. He ate scraps of food in the street, urinated on people he didn't like. That's assault, dude. We did that not long ago. Debasement of currency. Who did that not long ago? Let me see what this lady's saying. Okay. Okay, let's see what she's saying to get it translated into English. You don't have to come. You don't have to come because of the money. I will give the Hama 340 S. And then NS for order 183, and I ask for electricity in your place, and you will give it back to me when you get back to Aduman. Oh my god, it's so expensive. Okay, 340, yeah. Okay, thank you. Say, okay, thank you. Okay, thank you so much. I will, when I come home, I will give you the money. I come back to Male, Adunim, I will give you the money. The money. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, exclamation mark. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, printing money for Ukraine. Right, so then the money has less value, right? Okay, so this guy, he defecated in theaters and he pleasured himself in public. He was a pervert. I'm sorry. That's not cool. Seriously. That's not okay. You know, like, okay, it's one thing to it's one thing to want to make a statement, but that's not the type of statement you make. You know, it's disgusting, it's hurtful, it's assault. You know? He urinated on people he didn't like. He defecated in the theater and pleasured himself in public. He took austerity to extremes, living in a giant clay jar near the Athenian agora and shunning material comforts and conveniences. He's a freak. The more currency, the less it's worth. Simple economics. Yeah. So, I'm trying to find. So, an epigram on Diogenes by Antiphilus of Byzantium runs: a bag, a cloak, barley flour thickened with water, a staff fixed before his feet, and a clay cup were considered by the wise dog sufficient for the needs of life. Even here something superfluous, since, after seeing a countryman drinking from the hollow of his hand, he said, "Why, earthen cup, did I burden myself with you to no purpose? Why is gold valuable? Because there isn't much of it." Exactly. Makes sense, right? While Plato did indeed describe Diogenes as Socrates gone crazy, Diogenes was taken seriously as one of the founders, along with Socrates' pupil Antisthenes, of the philosophical movement called Cynicism, derived from the Greek kainikos, dog-like, and ancient commentators observe. I don't get why he was like a dog. Like, what, he just decided to behave like an animal? Like, what's wrong with this guy? There are 4 reasons why the cynics are so called. They cultivate indifference to social norms, eating and fornicating in public like dogs, going around barefoot and sleeping in tubs and on the street. It's not cool, you know? It's like acting like a disgusting pervert doesn't make you special. It just makes you an indecent human being that needs to be put away, right? Dogs are shameless animals, and cynics make a cult of shamelessness as if that quality were not lower than modesty but superior to it. Dogs are keen guard animals, and cynics are keen guardians of their philosophical tenets. Give me a break. There's no comparison. Greek city-states used to have tyrants, but it's not what you think it means. I think he once explained that tyrants just mean that it was one person having all the power to rule, right? Dogs distinguish between friends and enemies, and cynics recognize as friends and embrace those who are suited to their philosophy, while driving away those unsuited to it and barking at them like dogs. Despite his allegedly, yeah, you're teaching me. Despite his allegedly canine lifestyle, Diogenes seems to have had the resources and ability to write as many as 7 tragedies and 13 treatises, as Jean-Manuel Rabino observes. If Diogenes was in fact able to devote himself to writing, as there is good reason to believe, his material circumstances must have differed, at least intermittently, from the ones described by our sources. He must have had a stable writing materials and a place protected against the elements where he could work and store his scrolls. This kind of objection to the overwhelmingly anecdotal tradition compiled and preserved by Diogenes' namesake, Diogenes Laertius, who wrote a series of lives of philosophers some 700 years later, might be taken much further than Rabino is inclined. Many of the anecdotes, however, and the Pythie bon mots that show Diogenes as being no respecter of persons, are too good for a biographer to resist. Among the blunt wit and salacious sensationalism that characterized Diogenes Laertius's account, some historical details of the philosopher's biography and career emerge. Born in Sinope on the Black Sea, the son of a mint master, so he fled for doing like fraud, right? Hecesius was found to have produced counterfeit currency. According to an obviously fabricated later account, however, no less a voice than the Delphic oracles had instructed Diogenes to adulterate the currency. But in Socratic style, this was interpreted to mean that he should devote his life to finding the currency of a common social norms. Whatever. So then there's some stuff being said here. Once in Athens, he became a devotee of the rigorously ascetic life that was being advocated by Antisthenes. Diogenes had arrived there, accompanied by a slave, but when the latter ran away, he is said to have remarked, "If Manes can live without Diogenes, cannot Diogenes live without Manes?" He would go on to express disgust at the way masters depended on their slaves. He allegedly walked around the agora with an oil lamp, so that when asked what he was doing, he could say pointedly, "I'm trying to find a human being." I think that's the funniest thing out of all that I read about him that is actually has any meaning, right? Okay, among some of the best known stories about Diogenes are those of his undoubtedly fictitious encounters with Alexander the Great, who is said to have respected his reputation for simplicity and forthrightness. When the conquering general found him basking in the sun and asked what he could do for him, Diogenes bluntly replied, "Stand out of the sunlight." Very practical, right? Very quick-witted and practical. Alexander was said to have remarked admiringly, "If I were not Alexander, I would want to be Diogenes," to which Diogenes ungraciously retorted, "If I were not Diogenes, I'd still wish to be a Diogenes." He sounds like an asshole, I'm sorry. Not very nice and gracious. Less gracious still was his supposed response to Alexander when the latter found him examining a pile of human remains and asked what he was doing. "I'm looking for your father's bones, but I can't tell them apart from the bones of a slave." What an asshole. We read that the 2nd century Roman author Fronto noted that while both Socrates and Diogenes were forceful in serious manner, they practiced philosophy in quite different ways. So why do you like him, Redbeard? Socrates adopting a courteous and affable style of speaking. He did have a witty retort, but it's just not nice. By contrast with the intemperate language and brutal tax to which Diogenes was given, the dismissal by both philosophers of social and material refinement led to the same comments later being attributed to both. Both were credited with exclaiming and observing the mass of consumer products on sale in the marketplace. "Look at all these things I have no need of." Diogenes took the austere life to far greater lengths, to the point that he was said to have accused Socrates of having lived a life of luxury simply because the latter owned a house and a couch and occasionally wore shoes. He accused Socrates of living a life of luxury because the guy had a nice house. He owned a house, he had a couch, and occasionally wore shoes. He was even more contemptuous of Plato, considering him a man of words rather than actions. He might have been right there. I don't remember what I read about Plato. I did a video on Plato, but again, my memory is like a fish. Considering him a man of words rather than actions, he wrote a lost dialogue with a title that played on Plato's name, Platon, by using a similar sounding Greek word, saphen, meaning the prick. God, he's so mean. He's so mean. I don't think there's anything nice and cool about being cruel and mean. You know what I mean? Like, how do you put yourself in the mind of a 6th century BC figure? Yeah, but even then, it seemed back then like there was some sort of like way of behaving where it's socially acceptable. You know what I mean? 1 second. Okay, so did I do Plato? Hold on, I'm trying to check. Did I do a video on Plato? I like this, his candor. He wasn't scared. Yeah, I like that he wasn't scared either. But still, it's like, he could have been the same witty and rebellious type of guy without being rude. Yes, I spoke about Plato in one of my videos, right? Pythagoras, and I covered Plato. I forgot what his thing was about, right? Okay, so continuing on. How can one pick one's way through anecdotes and fabrications, mostly composed at a much later date, to arrive at a balanced assessment of Diogenes' philosophical contribution? There is a risk that one embraces a kind of contradiction mentioned above, blah, blah, blah. Diogenes was said to have condemned the Greeks' love of physical fitness and sporting prowess, as had the pre-Socratic philosopher Xenophanes before him, yet at the same time to have developed harsh exercises for improving his powers of endurance. Hypocrite, right? He's a hypocrite. Yeah, I love the hypocrisy, right? And even to have acquired some leather boxing gloves and beaten up a man who had previously attacked him. I'm okay with that. If he beat up a man that attacked him. The impression one is left with is that the idea of cynicism as a critique of authority and a challenge to societal values need a colorful figurehead to whom such anecdotes were likely to accrue. Even if a few of the stories and sayings can be vouched for as securely historical, they were to be influential in the development of Stoicism and the idea of cynicism itself. One might revise Voltaire's observation to say that if Diogenes had not existed, it would have been necessary to invent him. So that's it. Seriously? Okay, let's see another account of him, right? And then it talks about like the actual cynic philosophy, right? Because the other article didn't speak about cynicism as a philosophy and right? The cynics were careful observers of human nature and could not abide what they saw in others and in themselves. It's a whole big thing, the philosophy of history. Yeah, but a cynic is somebody that like is cynical of everything, which means they question everything. They don't believe anything, right? They're like negative in their view, right? That's what cynical people do, right? So let me see, like cynicism. What is cynicism? Right. Cynicism. Because he was a cynic, right? So cynicism. It's an inclination to believe that people are motivated purely by self-interest. Skepticism, public cynicism about changing is understandable. A school of ancient Greek philosophers, the cynics, yeah. It's basically to think negatively of everything and to be very cynical about life and not believe that, people are just doing things like it's just like to question people's motivations, right? Right. So hold on a second. What did I just do here? Okay. Back to the cynics. They're careful observers of human nature and could not abide what they saw in others and in themselves, namely a tendency to luxurious ambition. If the Library of Alexandria wasn't burnt, we'd have more to read. So there was actually a library that was burnt. Ugh, why would anyone do that? Right? They responded to this realization by dropping out of polite society. They saw badness in others, namely tendencies to luxury, ambition, stupidity, cruelty, and greed. I mean, I think they're just like realistic, but then that goes back to the argument of just like perspective. And then there's that whole thing that says, oh, what you see in others, you have in yourself, right? So if they could see all this evil in people, then maybe they have that in themselves, or maybe they're just seeing things for what they are, right? So because they saw people for being bad, they dropped out of polite society, and they sought to be liberated by the shackles of self-expectations and tried to see life as it really is, and things are as they really are. Their public stunts thus served the serious purpose of the heightening awareness of what is truly virtuous and what is merely conventional. Nature, not culture, was their yardstick. Their objective in living was to need as little as possible, and to want even less than that. The Cynics were not the world's first aesthetic, but they had given us that word from the Greek askesis, which means practice or training. The metaphor is drawn by the realm of ancient Greek athletics. Getting by on just a little is a form of exercise. They argued that will strengthen you and make you impervious to the buffeting of misfortune. Beat calamity to the punch was their working strategy. So basically, just make your life as horrible as it can be, so that you can, if you're meant to have a horrible life, just beat it to the punch, which means just like make it horrible before it's supposed to be horrible. And what's the point of that, right? Like, seriously. So Diogenes made a habit of begging from statues. He would beg from statues, from like images. He would go and beg from them. When asked why, he replied, to get good at being refused. So he would go up to statues and he would beg from like a stone statue, and of course the statue won't answer you. So then he's getting used to basically training himself to be less sensitive to rejection. The need to slow down, right? Um, the year 2022 marks the fifth anniversary of the book, The Limits to Growth. It's a landmark indictment of human overreach and excess, updating every 5 years since publication, is a Bible of environmental movement. In our new climate regime of global heating, it remains scripture still. The book's author, the late Daniela Meadows, and her fellow researchers, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so then it talks about less is more, the cynics' viewpoints, right, on less is more. The Cynics had a perverse way of arguing a point, a syllogism they were fond of employing to justify their squatting to the steps on the steps of the temples and sanctuaries. For example, went like this: everything belongs to the gods. The wise are the gods' friends. Friends hold things in common. Everything belongs to the wise. That, of course, is mostly a cheeky jibe at syllogistic logic. But the Cynics' species reasoning spacious reasoning could take a more serious turn, too. As one ancient biographer recounts, Diogenes used to say that since the gods lack nothing, the godlike should need only a little. The end game, okay, that's a good philosophy. So gods lack nothing because they are the gods. They have everything. And a person who is godlike shouldn't need much because they should be like God, who has everything and doesn't need much. But if God has everything, then a person who's godlike would need everything just like God. So then how does that prove anything, right? So gods lack nothing. So that a person lacks nothing either, like God. but a person needs more because they're not God, right? So it doesn't make sense. Whatever, I don't understand this. The gods fear us because we are mortal. Mortal means like we are able to die and disappear. So why would they be afraid of us? Because they're God. They don't need to be. They don't die, right? The end game of the cynic's less is more approach to self-actualization is on full display in this ancient summary of their delightful circuitous thinking. Even the despising of pleasure in itself is itself most pleasant once it becomes a habit. Diogenes was keen to point out, just as those who've grown accustomed to a pleasant life become miserable when they pass over to the opposite conditions, so those persons whose training has been the opposite from theirs enjoy despising pleasure with more pleasure than the pleasure themselves. Wow, it's complicated. What makes every day better? Right, weird. Put up and make do. The cynics lived frugally and ate food primarily for the sake of nutrition. Some cynics were vegetarian and drank only cold water to boot. To someone who asked Diogenes at what hour one should eat lunch, he said, "If rich, whenever you want; if poor, whenever you can." Diogenes is popularly remembered as having lived in a tub of barrel. In fact, his abode was large. Okay, I'm not understanding this. Okay, so the cynics lived frugally and ate food primarily for the sake. Could be less. I don't understand. Very weird. The cynics lived frugally and ate food primarily for the sake of nutrition. Some cynics were vegetarians and drank only cold water to boot. To someone who asked Diogenes at what hour one should eat lunch, he said, "If rich, whenever you want; if poor, whenever you can." Diogenes is popularly remembers having lived in a tub or barrel. In fact, his abode was a large terracotta storage jar or pithos. Since were used to bury the dead, this choice of accommodation not only advertises Diogenes' frugal lifestyle, it's also a statement, like saying I'm living as if I'm dead. It's also a statement of the philosophical view that life is a rehearsal for death. Oh my god, it's so miserable. Externalities. The cynics were well understood what economists now call externalities, or the harmful side effects and human costs involving in the production and acquisition of goods. In a dialogue attributed to the satirist Lucian of Samosata, an unnamed cynic likens the god in charge of the world to a host at a dinner party. The god is like a good host. He places before us a variety of many good kinds of dishes, so that we have what is appropriate for us. Some things for the wealthy, some for the sick, some for the strong, some for the weak. Not so that we all may use everything, but so that each of us might use for ourselves what falls into our domain, and of those items what we happen to need most. Okay. Whereas you, the cynic continues, addressing his interlocutor, are exactly like a person who grabs everything out of greed and lack of restraint. You think it's fine to use it all, including goods from all over, and not just what you have close to hand. You don't think your own land and sea are enough in themselves, but import your pleasures from the corners of the globe and always prefer what is foreign to what is produced locally, what is costly to what is inexpensive, and what's hard to procure to what's easily acquired. He has a point there, right? He has a point there, right? Greed is a huge thing. The many costly goods you think conduct conducively to your happiness, over which you exult, only come to be yours through misery and suffering. That gold you pray so hard to get your hands on, the silver, the expensive houses, the finely tailored clothing, and all the accoutrements that go along with these things. How much do they cost in trouble? How much is in human labor and danger, or rather in human blood, death, and destruction? Many people are lost at sea for the sake of these things, and the people who go in search for or manufacture them suffer terribly. This is an extract from a long piece which appeared in Idler 86, September-October 2022. Okay, so that's interesting, right? Okay. Did we read this? Yeah, we read that. We read this. And I would say I'm a cynic. Right? Right? I would say I'm a cynic. Been a cynic since day one. Right? Okay. Back to Diogenes of the... Let's see what the Wikipedia has to say. Right? The story told of Diogenes illustrated the logical consistency of his character. He inured himself to the weather by living in a clay wine jar belonging to the temple of Cybele. He destroyed the single wooden bowl he possessed on seeing a peasant boy drinking from the hollow of his hands. He then exclaimed, "Fool that I am, to have been carrying superfluous baggage all this time." It was contrary to Athenian custom to eat within the marketplace, and still he would eat there, for he explained then when rebuked, it was during the time he was in the marketplace that he felt hungry. He used to stroll about in full daylight with a lamp. When asked what he was doing, he would answer, "I'm looking for man." Modern sources often say that Diogenes was looking for an honest man, but in ancient sources he's simply looking for man. This has been interpreted to mean that, in his view, the unreasonable behavior of the people around him meant that they did not qualify as men. Diogenes looked for a man, but reputedly found nothing but rascals and scoundrels. Yeah. God. Well, Diogenes taught by living example. He tried to demonstrate that wisdom and happiness belongs to the man who is independent of society, and that civilization is regressive. He scorned not only family and socio-political organization, but also property rights and reputation. He even rejected traditional ideas about human decency. In addition to eating in the marketplace, Diogenes is said to have urinated on some people who insulted him, defecated in the theater, masturbated in public, and pointed at people with his middle finger, which was considered insulting. When asked about his eating in public, he said, "If taking breakfast is nothing out of place, then it is nothing out of place in the marketplace." On the indecency of his masturbating in public. Yeah, it shows a picture here of somebody naked. He would say, "If only it were as easy to banish hunger by rubbing my belly." Oh, he is a little bit of a pervert. Diogenes had nothing but disdain for Plato and his abstract philosophy. Diogenes viewed Antisthenes as a true heir to Socrates and shared his love of virtue and indifference to wealth, together with disdain for general opinion. Diogenes shared Socrates' belief that he could function as a doctor to men's souls and improve them morally, while at the same time holding contempt for their obtuseness. Plato once described Diogenes as a Socrates gone mad. According to Diogenes Laertius, when Plato gave the tongue-in-cheek definition of man as featherless bipeds, Diogenes plucked a chicken and brought it into Plato's academy, saying, "Here is Plato's man," and so the academy added with broad flat nails to the definition. Diogenes Laertius also related a number of more bawdy details whereby Diogenes would spit and fart in public. Oh my god. Yeah, I'm a hypocrite because I fart in public on my channel. Oh my god, and I'm busy sitting here thinking it's gross. According to the story, which seems to have originated with Menipus of Gadara, Diogenes was captured by pirates while on voyage to Aegina and sold as a slave in Crete to Corinthian named Exeniades. Being asked his trade, he replied that he knew no trade but that of governing men, and that he wished to be sold to a man who needed a master. Exeniades liked his spirit and hired Diogenes to tutor his children. As tutor to Exeniades' two sons, it is said that he lived in Corinth for the rest of his life, which he devoted to preaching the doctrines of virtuous self-control. There are many stories about what actually happened to him after his time with Exeniades' two sons. There are stories stating he was set free after he became a cherished member of the household, while one says he was set free almost immediately, and still another states that he grew old and died at Exeniades' house in Corinth. He is even said to have lectured to large audiences at the Isthmian Games. Although, what's Isthmian Games? Although most of the stories about his living in a jar are located in Athens, Lucian recounts a tale where he lived in a jar near the gymnasium in Corinth. So he continued to live in a jar. Jeez. It was Corinth that a meeting between Alexander the Great and Diogenes is supposed to have taken place. These stories may be apocryphal. Okay. Death. There are conflicting accounts of Diogenes' death. His contemporaries alleged that he held his breath until he expired. Oh my god. Although other accounts of his death say he became ill from eating raw octopus or from an infected dog bite. When asked how he wished to be buried, he left instructions to be thrown outside the city wall so that wild animals could feast on his body. When asked if he minded this, he said, "Not at all, as long as you provide me with a stick to chase the creatures away." When asked how he could use the stick since he would lack awareness, he replied, "If I lack awareness, then why should I care what happens to me when I'm dead?" To the end, Diogenes made fun of people's excessive concern with the proper treatment of the dead. The Corinthians erected to his memory a pillar on which rested a dog of Parian marble. It was alleged by Plutarch and Diogenes Laertius that both Diogenes and Alexander died on the same day. However, the actual death date of neither man can be verified. Okay. So Diogenes was insulted with the epithet doggish and made a virtue of it. Okay. There are 4 reasons why cynics are so named. First, because of the indifference of their way of life, where they make a cult of indifference and, like dogs, eat and make love in public, go barefoot and sleep in tubs and cross roads. The second reason is that the dog is a shameless animal and they make a cult of shamelessness, not being beneath modesty but as superior to it. The third reason is that the dog is a good guard. Nonsense. So do you recognize blah blah blah? Diogenes believed human beings live hypocritically and would do well to study the dog. Besides performing natural body functions in public with ease, a dog will eat anything and make no fuss about where to sleep. That's not true. Dogs live in the present and have no use of pretentious philosophy. They know instinctively who is a friend and who is foe. Diogenes states that other dogs bite their enemies. I bite my friends to save them. Diogenes maintained that all the artificial growths of society were incompatible with happiness, and that morality implies a return to the simplicity of nature. So great was his austerity and simplicity that the Stoics would later claim him to be the wise man, or Sophos, in his words. Humans have complicated every simple gift of the gods. Although Socrates had previously identified himself as belonging to the world rather than a city, Diogenes is credited with the first known use of the word cosmopolitan. When he was asked from where he came, he replied, "I'm a citizen of the world." Cosmopolitan. Oh, I didn't know that. That's what it meant. This was a radical claim in a world where man's identity was intimately tied to the citizenship or a particular state. As an exile and an outcast, a man with no social identity, Diogenes made a mark on his contemporaries. Depictions in art. Okay. Psychology. Diogenes' name has been applied to a behavioral disorder characterized by apparent involuntarily self-neglect and hoarding. The disorder afflicts the elderly and is quite inappropriately named, as Diogenes deliberately rejected common standards of material comfort and was anything but a hoarder. It's not nice that they put his name on hoarders, but I guess that's his legacy. Like, he was a hypocrite in some ways. Like, he claimed that the Athens Greeks were worshipping the body and doing exercise while he did exercise himself to toughen himself up for nature. Like, it was a bit hypocritical. So yeah, like, right? Yeah, that's interesting. I thought he would do like actual stunts, but it seems that he didn't do much. He just did really nasty stuff, like be a pervert, like pee on people and shit in public, and just trying to rebel against society, but at the same time not respecting basic decency. So that, I think, made him a bit of a hypocrite, because if you can't respect basic human decency, like, he was the one that was cynical and saying how people are greedy and cruel and mean, and then he goes and behaves in a way that disrespects a human being by like acting like a pervert and a scoundrel and nasty, you know, by defecating in public, like not caring about other people, and doing stuff which is indecent, right? Yeah. So that's interesting. That's something that, I guess, he was a hypocrite. And I'm sure he could have made even a bigger effect on society if he didn't act like a pervert and pee on people. I mean, like, I understand why he would pee on somebody who insults him, but generally just to like fuck in public and masturbate in public and that type of thing is disgusting. It's just, it's not, he's a hypocrite, right? Okay, whatever. Yeah, that's that, right? So, God. So that's the story of Diogenes and his philosophy of cynicism, which wasn't much of a philosophy. It's just him being cynical and complaining about the world and how people are cruel and this and that. And I don't see much in his philosophy, because there's not much philosophy there's not much to think about. It's just people who are cynical, they just see things for as it is, and it shouldn't be a movement. It's just a personality, I think, right? And yeah, so that's my thought on Diogenes. All right, then. Take care. Bye, people.